Jake Morrison stared at his orders with growing disbelief. After 12 years of military service and 3 combat tours, they were assigning him to babysitting duty. The message on his datapad was clear enough. He would be the personal security detail for an alien diplomat during the coalition talks. Not just any alien either, but a princess from some species called the Sylvari. He had seen pictures of them before. The Sylvari looked almost human, except for their pointed ears and silver hair. Humans called them space elves behind their backs. They were beautiful, in an otherworldly way that made people uncomfortable. Jake did not care about their appearance. He cared about being pulled from real military operations to play bodyguard. The transport ship arrived at the diplomatic station 3 days later. Jake stood at attention in his dress uniform, watching as the airlock cycled open. Ambassador Claire Bennett stood beside him, smiling her practiced diplomatic smile. She had already given Jake a long lecture about proper behavior around alien dignitaries. When the Sylvari delegation emerged, Jake felt his breath catch despite himself. The princess was tall and graceful, moving like water given form. Her silver hair fell to her waist in elaborate braids. Her violet eyes swept across the docking bay without emotion. She wore flowing robes that seemed impractical for space travel. What caught Jake's attention more was the creature perched on her shoulder. It looked like a small reptile, maybe the size of a house cat, with scales that shimmered between red and gold. The thing had intelligent eyes that tracked every movement in the bay. Ambassador Bennett stepped forward with her welcoming speech. The princess, whose name was Alindra, barely acknowledged her. She simply inclined her head slightly and walked past, her small entourage following. The reptile on her shoulder chirped softly. Jake fell into step behind them, his hand near his sidearm out of habit. This was going to be a long assignment. The diplomatic quarters were luxurious by military standards. Alindra dismissed her attendants and entered her private rooms without a word. Jake took up position outside the door, already bored. The reptile had stayed with her, and he wondered what kind of pet it was. Hours passed slowly. Jake reviewed security protocols on his datapad and tried not to think about his team back on the front lines. They were probably engaging Krell forces right now while he stood outside a door watching nothing happen. Around midnight station time, Jake heard something from inside the quarters. The sound of movement, quick and precise. He accessed the security feed, telling himself it was just routine monitoring. What he saw made him forget protocol entirely. Alindra had changed into tight-fitting black clothing. She moved through what looked like combat forms, her body flowing from one strike to the next with lethal grace. This was not dancing or exercise. These were killing techniques. The reptile sat on a perch nearby, watching her with those 2 intelligent eyes. When Alindra finished her routine, she was barely breathing hard. She looked directly at the security camera. Jake had the uncomfortable feeling she knew he was watching. 3 days passed in tense routine. Alindra attended boring diplomatic meetings where humans and Sylvari discussed trade agreements and military cooperation. The Krell Empire was expanding, swallowing colonies and leaving dead worlds behind. Humanity needed allies. The Sylvari needed resources. It was a practical arrangement with no warmth on either side. Jake noticed things about Alindra that did not match her diplomatic cover. She had calluses on her hands from weapon use. Her eyes constantly scanned for threats and exit routes. When other diplomats talked, she listened with the intensity of someone gathering intelligence, rather than making polite conversation. The reptile, which she called Ember, grew noticeably larger each day. By the end of the first week, it was the size of a medium dog. No one seemed concerned about this except Jake. Everything changed when the assassins came. The alarm woke Jake from a light sleep in his quarters. Intruder alert, the system screamed. Multiple hostiles detected near the diplomatic wing. Jake was moving before he finished reading the message, weapon in hand, heart pounding. He reached Alindra's door to find it already open. Bodies lay in the corridor, their armor melted through by intense heat. The smell of burned metal and flesh made Jake's eyes water. Inside the quarters, Alindra stood over two more attackers. She held a blade that seemed to be made of crystallized light. Her movements had been so fast that Jake almost missed her finishing the last one. Ember stood beside her, smoke curling from his nostrils. The reptile was glowing with internal heat. More attackers poured in from the far corridor. These were Krell, their bodies more machine than flesh, weapons integrated into their arms. They moved with cold, mechanical precision. Jake did not hesitate. He opened fire, his shots coordinated with Alindra's movements without planning. She danced between enemies while he provided covering fire. Ember released bursts of flame that caught to Krell in the face, sending them stumbling back. A Krell sniper round came from nowhere, aimed at Alindra's head. Jake saw it coming and threw himself forward, taking the hit on his shoulder instead. The impact spun him around, and he hit the wall hard. Pain exploded through his body. Alindra killed the sniper with a thrown blade that crossed 30 meters in a blur. Then she was at Jake's side, her hands on his wounded shoulder. She spoke something in her own language, words that felt like music and fire combined. The pain vanished. Jake looked down to see his wound closing. The bleeding stopped. Alindra's hands glowed with soft purple light. Jake stared at her, unable to process what he was seeing. She met his gaze with those violet eyes, and for the first time, saw something other than cold distance in them. "You are not a princess," Jake said. His voice came out rough. Alindra pulled her hands away, the glow fading. She stood and helped him to his feet with surprising strength. Her expression was unreadable again, but something had shifted between them. "No," she said quietly. "I am something far more dangerous." Security teams arrived moments later, but the fight was already over. 6 dead Krell assassins lay in the corridor. Ambassador Bennett rushed in, her face pale with shock. She immediately began asking questions. But Alindra simply walked past her back into her quarters. Ember followed at her heels, now the size of a large wolf. Jake touched his shoulder where the wound had been. There was not even a scar. He looked at the closed door to Alindra's quarters and realized his boring assignment had just become the most important mission of his life. Something was very wrong with this diplomatic mission. The Sylvari had not sent a princess. They had sent a weapon, and Jake was now bound to her in ways he did not yet understand. The attack changed everything. Military Command moved the entire diplomatic mission to Sentinel Prime, Earth's primary defense station, orbiting Mars. Jake received official orders assigning him as Alindra's permanent security detail. His second-in-command, Lieutenant Maya Rodriguez, thought he had gotten lucky. Jake knew better. Sentinel Prime was massive, housing over 10,000 military personnel and twice that many civilians. The station bristled with weapons and housed the fastest ships humanity had ever built. If war came, this would be the first line of defense. Alindra's new quarters were in the secure diplomatic wing, surrounded by guards and sensors. Jake set up his station outside her door again, but this time he paid closer attention. His shoulder where she had healed him still tingled sometimes, a reminder that nothing about this situation was normal. For 3 days, Alindra remained silent and distant. She attended meetings, spoke only when directly addressed, and returned to her quarters each evening. Ember continued to grow at an alarming rate. Within a week of arriving at Sentinel Prime, the creature was the size of a small horse. Military scientists wanted to study Ember. Alindra refused. When General Nathan Cross tried to insist, she simply stared at him until he backed down. Jake watched the exchange with interest. Whatever Alindra was, she commanded respect even from Earth's highest-ranking officers. On the 4th day, Alindra surprised Jake by inviting him into her quarters. Not for a meeting or security check, but to talk. Jake entered cautiously, his hand near his weapon despite knowing it would be useless against her. She sat in a meditation pose on the floor. Ember lay beside her, his head resting on his massive front claws. The creature's eyes tracked Jake as he entered, but showed no hostility. Alindra gestured for Jake to sit. He did, keeping a respectful distance. She began to talk, and Jake listened without interrupting. She explained that she was not royalty. The diplomatic cover was necessary because humans were not ready for the truth. She was a warrior, trained from childhood in combat arts that humans had never seen. Her people, the Sylvari, had sent her to Earth for a specific purpose. The Krell Empire was not just conquering worlds. They were consuming them completely. Every planet they took was stripped of all resources, leaving dead husks floating in space. Thousands of civilizations had fallen to them. The Krell did not negotiate, did not show mercy, did not stop. Earth was next on their list. Jake felt his blood run cold. The briefings had mentioned Krell expansion, but nothing like this. Alindra continued speaking, her voice calm but her eyes showing old pain. The Sylvari had fought the Krell for centuries. They had lost more worlds than they could count. They learned that fighting the Krell required more than advanced weapons. It required warriors bonded to creatures like Ember. Ember was a Draconite. His species had evolved alongside the Sylvari for thousands of years. They were partners, not pets. Bonded pairs fought together, thought together, sometimes even died together. The Draconites were nearly extinct now, hunted by the Krell because they were the only natural predators that could match. Krell war machines. Jake looked at Ember with new understanding. The creature met his gaze, and Jake could swear he saw intelligence there equal to any human. "Why tell me this?" Jake asked. "Why now?" "Because you saved my life," Alindra answered simply. "And because you deserve to know what is coming." Over the following weeks, something unexpected happened. Jake and Alindra developed a partnership that went beyond guard and principle. She began teaching him Sylvari combat techniques during their night watches. He showed her human tactical strategies and military protocols. Jake learned that Alindra was over 200 years old, though she looked no older than 30 in human terms. She had fought in 17 major battles and survived wounds that would have killed any human. The Draken Guard, her order, had once numbered in the thousands. Now she was one of the last. Ember continued to grow, and Alindra explained that he was reaching his adult size. Soon, he would be large enough to carry riders into battle. The bond between them was visible now. When Alindra moved, Ember anticipated her movements. When she fought in practice, he adjusted position to cover her blind spots. Jake's colleague, Captain Lisa Grant, made the mistake of calling Alindra an alien pet during a briefing. Jake corrected her sharply, his tone leaving no room for argument. The other officers looked surprised. Alindra, standing in the back of the room, gave Jake that rare hint of a smile. The peaceful routine shattered when Commander Nicole Hayes from Intelligence brought devastating news. Krell fleet movements indicated a major offensive was coming. Target, Earth. Estimated arrival, 3 weeks. The War Council convened immediately. Admirals and generals filled the command center, their faces grim. Alindra attended as a military consultant. Her diplomatic cover dropped entirely. She stood before the gathered leadership and told them hard truths. The Krell brought planet-killer weapons to every major conquest. These were not bombs or missiles. They were massive machines that could drain all biological matter from a world in under 3 days. Every living thing, from humans to bacteria, would be consumed and processed into raw materials. Earth's defenses were impressive by human standards. Against the Krell, they were barely adequate. The fleet could slow them down but not stop them. Ground forces would buy time but not victory. Unless something changed dramatically, Earth would fall. General Cross asked the obvious question. What could change the outcome? Alindra looked at Ember, who had grown too large to fit comfortably in the command center and waited outside. She turned back to the assembled officers and revealed the final truth. She was not sent to Earth to help humanity fight. She was sent to evaluate whether humans were worth saving. The Sylvari Council had written Earth off as another lost cause. They could not afford to waste military resources defending a species that would fall anyway. But Alindra had made her own decision. She had watched humans fight against impossible odds. She had seen their courage, their adaptability, their refusal to surrender even when logic said they should. She had been saved by a human who barely knew her. If Earth fell, Alindra announced, she would fall with it. That was what it meant to be Drakengard, to stand against extinction, no matter the odds. Jake saw tears on her face for the first time. She quickly wiped them away, but everyone in the room had seen. The most powerful warrior any of them had ever met was crying for a world not her own. Admiral Victoria Lane, commander of Earth's defense fleet, stood and saluted Alindra. One by one, every officer in the room did the same. It was not protocol. It was respect. After the meeting, Jake found Alindra on an observation deck, staring at Earth below. Ember lay beside her, his massive form barely fitting in the space. "Your people abandoned us," Jake said quietly. "But you stayed." Alindra nodded. "The Sylvari Council makes decisions based on logic and probability. They have lost too many worlds to hope. But I am Drakengard. We do not fight because we expect to win. We fight because it is right." Jake stood beside her, looking at the blue planet below. Somewhere down there were billions of people who had no idea what was coming. They went about their lives, unaware that in 3 weeks, everything might end. "We will not go quietly," Jake promised. "If the Krell want Earth, they will pay for every meter in blood." Alindra looked at him, and Jake saw something he had not seen before. "Trust, then we fight together," she said. "Human and Sylvari. Dragon and soldier." Jake nodded, together. In the reflection of the observation window, Jake could see Ember watching them both. The dragon's eyes glowed softly in the dim light, and Jake had the strangest feeling that the creature approved. The Krell did not wait 3 weeks. They struck early, hitting the outer colonies with overwhelming force. 3 human settlements were destroyed in a single coordinated assault. Over 50,000 people died before anyone could react. The images coming back from the attacks showed complete devastation. Nothing remained but dead rock and empty space. Earth's military mobilized immediately. Jake received a promotion to major in command of a special operations unit. His team consisted of hand-picked soldiers who had proven themselves in combat. Maya Rodriguez became his executive officer. Lieutenant Amy Chen, the best pilot on Sentinel Prime, joined them. Sergeant Kate Patterson brought her demolitions expertise, and Alindra with Ember became official members of the unit. There was resistance from some officers, but Admiral Lane overruled all objections. If humanity was going to survive, they needed every advantage. Ember had reached his full adult size. The dragon was massive, over 40 feet long from nose to tail, with wings that could span 60 feet when fully extended. His scales shimmered like molten metal, and when he breathed, small flames flickered from his nostrils. He was beautiful and terrifying in equal measure. General Cross hated the entire arrangement. He saw Alindra as a security risk, and Ember as an uncontrolled alien weapon. When Alindra proposed a daring raid on a Krell supply depot, Cross rejected it immediately. Too risky, too unpredictable, too likely to fail. Jake disagreed. The supply depot fed 3 Krell battle groups. Taking it out would disrupt their entire offensive in this sector. The mission was dangerous but possible. He took the proposal directly to Admiral Lane, bypassing Cross entirely. It was career suicide if she rejected him. Admiral Lane studied the mission plan for 10 minutes in silence. Then she approved it with one condition. If the mission failed, Jake and his entire team would face court-martial. Jake accepted the terms. 3 days later, they launched the raid. Amy Chen piloted a modified assault transport, keeping it in stealth mode as they approached the Krell depot. The structure was massive, floating in deep space between 2 dead worlds. Hundreds of automated defense systems surrounded it. Alindra provided Sylvari cloaking technology, devices that bent light and sensor readings around the ship. It was not perfect, but it gave them a chance. Jake watched his team prepare. Checking weapons and equipment with practiced efficiency, Ember rode in a specially modified cargo bay. The dragon was calm, his intelligent eyes following every movement. Alindra sat beside him, one hand resting on his massive head. The bond between them was visible now, a subtle glow that connected warrior and dragon. They penetrated the depot's outer defenses without incident. Amy guided the ship through automated patrol patterns, her piloting skills keeping them invisible. Kate set charges on key support structures while Maya provided overwatch. Jake coordinated the team, watching multiple screens at once. Then everything went wrong. Alarms blared throughout the depot. Lights flashed red. Krell soldiers poured from every corridor, their mechanical bodies moving with inhuman speed. The trap was perfect. They had been waiting. Jake realized the truth in an instant. The Krell had been tracking Alindra since the first assassination attempt. They knew she would be key to any human resistance. This was not a supply depot. It was bait. The team fought desperately. Jake's rifle barked steadily, each shot finding a target. Maya took position at a choke point, her heavy weapon cutting down Krell by the dozen. Kate triggered her charges early, collapsing entire sections of the structure. But there were too many enemies. The Krell kept coming, wave after wave of cybernetic soldiers. Amy's escape routes were being cut off one by one. They were going to die here. Alindra looked at Ember and spoke in her own language. The dragon's eyes flared bright red. Then something incredible happened. Ember exploded into motion. His body expanded, scales rippling with power, wings unfurling to their full, terrifying span. The cargo bay walls buckled and tore as the dragon forced his way out. He roared, and the sound shook the entire depot like an earthquake. Jake had seen combat footage of many things. He had watched nuclear weapons detonate and capital ships explode. Nothing prepared him for what he witnessed next. Ember became a force of pure destruction. His flames were not mere fire, but something far more intense, hot enough to melt reinforced battle armor in seconds. His claws tore through bulkheads like paper. His tail swept corridors clear of enemies. And Alindra rode him, the two moving as one perfect entity. The Krell threw everything at them. Automated guns, missile batteries, even kamikaze drones. Ember absorbed hits that should have killed him and kept fighting. Alindra wielded her crystalline blade, cutting down any enemy that got close. Together, they were unstoppable. Jake rallied his team and pushed forward. With Ember clearing the path, they fought their way to the primary objective. Kate planted the real charges, the ones that would destroy the depot completely. Maya covered their retreat, her weapon overheating from constant fire. But the cost was high. Maya took a plasma bolt to her side and went down hard. Jake dragged her to cover while Amy provided suppressing fire. Kate's leg was burned badly from a close explosion. But she refused medical attention until the mission was complete. They set the timer for 5 minutes and ran. Ember carved an escape route through the chaos, his massive body a shield for the humans following behind. Amy got the transport moving, engines screaming at maximum power. The explosion was visible from 3 star systems away. The depot detonated in a cascade of secondary explosions, taking out Krell ships that had been hiding nearby. The shockwave caught their transport and sent it spinning. But Amy wrestled it back under control. They made it back to Sentinel Prime barely. Maya was rushed to emergency surgery. Amy had a broken arm and multiple fractures. Kate could barely walk. But they were alive in the aftermath. Military intelligence analyzed the data they had recovered. What they found was worse than anyone had imagined. The depot had contained information on the Krell's true plans. They were not coming to conquer Earth. They were coming to harvest it. The planet-killer weapon was already en route. A massive machine that would strip Earth of all biological life in 72 hours. Every plant, every animal, every human would be consumed and processed. The planet would become just another dead rock in the Krell's expanding empire, and it would arrive in 3 days. Jake stood in the medical bay, watching Maya sleep off the surgery. The doctor said she would survive, but would need months to recover fully. He felt the weight of command pressing down on him. How do you fight something like this with only 3 days? Alindra found him there. Ember waited outside, too large to fit through the medical bay doors. She looked exhausted, her silver hair dulled from the strain of the battle. Using the full power of the dragon bond took a terrible toll. She told Jake the truth she had been hiding. The Sylvari Council had not sent her to evaluate humans. They had sent her to die with them. Every world the Krell targeted fell. There were no exceptions in recorded history. The Council could not waste resources on a hopeless fight, but Alindra had stayed anyway. She stayed because Jake had fought for her when his own people would not. She stayed because humanity refused to give up even when logic said they should. She stayed because it was right, If humanity falls, she said quietly, I fall with you. That is what it means to be Drakengard. Jake saw tears on her face again. This warrior, who had lived to centuries and fought in countless battles, was crying for a species, not her own. He reached out and took her hand. Her skin was warm, almost hot, from the residual power of the dragon bond. Then we fight together, Jake said. Until the end? Alendra squeezed his hand and nodded. Outside, Ember rumbled softly, the sound carrying through the walls. The dragon understood. They all understood. 3 days to save the world. It seemed impossible, but humans had always specialized in doing the impossible. Earth entered total war footing. Every military asset humanity possessed was mobilized for the defense. Civilian ships were armed with whatever weapons could be mounted. Orbital defense platforms came online ahead of schedule. Millions of people volunteered for military service. Though most would not have time for proper training, Admiral Lane gave Jake command of the Special Operations Division. Alindra became co-commander, her combat expertise too valuable to ignore. The military brass no longer cared about protocol or politics. They needed every advantage they could find. Jake assembled his staff in a secure briefing room. Maya was there despite her injuries, refusing to stay in medical. Amy had her broken arm in a support brace but insisted she could fly. Kate limped in on crutches. Alindra stood beside Ember, who barely fit in the room, even with his wings folded tight. The plan was insane. They would insert a team directly into the Harvester using Ember as transport. The dragon could survive the approach through the Krell fleet defenses. Once inside, they would plant a quantum warhead in the core and detonate it, triggering a chain reaction that would destroy the entire machine. The problem was obvious. The Harvester was protected by over 300 Krell warships and generated shields that could stop nuclear weapons. Getting in would be nearly impossible. Getting out would be completely impossible. Admiral Lane asked the question everyone was thinking. What were the chances of success? Jake did not lie. Less than 10%, maybe 5%. Probably lower, and the chance of survival for the insertion team was effectively zero. Silence filled the room. Maya spoke first, her voice steady, despite her pain. She was in. Amy nodded agreement. Kate said she was not missing this fight. One by one, Jake's core team volunteered for a suicide mission. Alindra revealed something then that changed the equation. The dragon bond had deeper levels than she had shown. When Rider and Dragon achieved perfect synchronization, they could share life force itself. It made them nearly invincible for brief periods. The cost was enormous. Each use burned years off both their lives. She had done it only twice before. Both times nearly killed her. Admiral Lane asked how many times she could do it. Alendra's answer was simple. As many as it takes. The fleet launched with 50 hours until the Harvester arrived. Earth's defensive forces numbered in the hundreds of ships, from massive carriers to small frigates. Against the Krell armada, it looked like insects fighting a boot. The battle began in high orbit. Krell ships emerged from faster-than-light travel with perfect precision, forming attack formations immediately. The human fleet met them with everything they had, space lit up with weapons fire. Missiles streaked between ships. Energy beams carved through armor. Explosions bloomed like deadly flowers. Jake watched from his command station, coordinating special forces teams while the fleet fought for Earth's survival. It was a slaughter. Human ships fought bravely, but they were outmatched. A Krell destroyer took 3 human frigates to bring down. Their carriers shrugged off hits that should have crippled them. Within the first hour, Earth had lost 30 ships. The Krell had lost 6, but humanity bought time. Every minute the fleet held was another minute for Jake's team to prepare. The insertion team boarded their transport. 20 volunteers accompanied Jake's core group. None of them expected to come back. They said their goodbyes to families via video messages. They wrote final letters. They made peace with their deaths. Alendra mounted Ember outside the main hangar. The dragon's scales glowed with building power as she initiated the full synchronization. Her eyes turned the same bright red as Ember's. Energy crackled between them. Visible arcs of power that made the air shimmer. The volunteers loaded into a specially modified assault pod attached to Ember's back. It was not graceful or comfortable, but it would protect them during the flight. Kate checked the quantum warhead one final time. The device was small, barely larger than a suitcase, but contained enough destructive force to crack a moon. Amy piloted a support craft that would provide covering fire. Maya coordinated from Sentinel Prime, too injured to make the insertion herself. She gave Jake a final salute through the video link. "Come back alive," she ordered. Jake could not promise that, so he said nothing. Ember launched from the station with a roar that shook the hull. His wings caught space itself somehow, propelling them forward faster than should be possible. Alindra guided him through the battlefield. Dodging weapons, fire, and debris with impossible precision, the Krell fleet noticed them immediately. Dozens of fighters broke formation to intercept. Energy weapons lit up space around them. Ember flew through it all, his synchronized form absorbing hits that would have vaporized any ship. When fighters got too close, he released bursts of flame that turned them to slag. The Harvester loomed ahead. It was enormous beyond comprehension, a machine the size of a small moon. Its surface crawled with organic-looking structures, veins and arteries carrying stolen life between processing centers. The sight made Jake sick. Krell defenses intensified. Automated guns tracked Ember's flight. Missiles launched in swarms. A wall of fire tried to cut them off. But Alindra and Ember moved as one being, faster and more agile than any machine. They penetrated the outer defensive screen. The insertion pod detached and crashed through the Harvester's hull. Metal tore and sparks flew. The team was thrown around inside, despite crash webbing. When the pod stopped moving, Jake kicked the door open and led them out. Inside the Harvester was nightmare made real. The corridors pulsed like living organs. Walls were covered in biomechanical structures grown from harvested life. The team saw faces in the walls, millions of them, from 1,000 different species. All the Krell's previous victims were here, absorbed and repurposed. Kate threw up. Amy could barely hold her weapon. The volunteers moved like they were in shock. Only Jake and Alindra kept moving forward. They had a mission. The Krell defenders came in waves. Cybernetic soldiers modified for close combat, automated drones that shot from the walls, biomechanical horrors that were more victim than attacker. The team fought through, losing volunteers one by one. Jake's rifle was nearly empty when they reached a junction. Kate triggered charges that collapsed a pursuing group. Amy provided covering fire with her good arm. They were running on adrenaline and desperation. The core chamber was 15 minutes away according to the map data. They had 12 volunteers left. The quantum warhead was still intact. They might actually make it. Then the Krell commander appeared. It was 12 feet tall, more machine than living being. Weapons were built into its arms. Armor covered every surface. Most horrifying were its eyes, which showed just enough humanity to reveal. What it had once been before the Krell remade it, Alindra stepped forward to face it alone. She told Jake to take the team and complete the mission. The Krell commander had been built specifically to hunt, Drakan Guard. This was a fight she might not win. Jake refused to leave. His exact words were simple. "You said, if humanity falls, you fall with us. Well, it works both ways. We stand together or not at all." His words echoed through the team's communication channel. Kate turned back from the corridor ahead. Amy limped into position beside Jake. The surviving volunteers, 11 strangers who had accepted death already, returned to stand with them, humanity and Sylvari together. Facing extinction as one, the Krell commander attacked with mechanical precision. It was built to counter everything Alindra could do, but it was not built to fight an entire team working in perfect coordination. They brought it down through sheer determination. Ember, who had been clearing external threats, tore through the hull and ripped out the commander's power core. Alindra drove her blade through its neural matrix. Jake fired the killing shot into its optical sensors. The timer showed 30 seconds remaining when they reached the core. Kate placed the warhead with shaking hands. Jake armed it. 20 seconds. 15, They ran like death itself was chasing them. Because it was. The explosion consumed everything. The harvester exploded like a dying star. The blast wave expanded outward in a sphere of pure destruction, consuming everything in its path. 2/3 of the Krell fleet was caught in the initial explosion. Ships were vaporized instantly. Their shields and armor, meaningless against such overwhelming force. The shockwave reached the human defense fleet seconds later. Ships that had been fighting desperately suddenly found their enemies gone. The surviving Krell vessels, damaged and disorganized, began to retreat. For the first time in recorded history, the Krell were running. Earth's fleet pursued them, pressing the advantage. Admiral Lane coordinated the counterattack from Sentinel Prime, her voice steady despite her exhaustion. The battle continued for another 6 hours, but the outcome was no longer in doubt. The Krell offensive had broken. Jake regained consciousness in the medical bay 3 days later. His body hurt in ways he could not describe. Burns, fractures, internal injuries. The doctors said he was lucky to be alive. Ember had grabbed their entire team at the last second and flown through the explosion itself. The dragon's synchronized form had protected them just enough. Kate was in the bed next to him, her leg in a regeneration cast. Amy was across the room, sleeping off surgery on her arm. Of the 11 volunteers who had stood with them in the final fight, only 4 survived. Their names were being engraved on the memorial wall. Heroes everyone, Maya visited on the 4th day. She walked with a cane but was recovering faster than expected. She told Jake about the aftermath. 50,000 human casualties across the entire battle. A dozen cities damaged from debris that made it through the defenses. The orbital grid was in ruins, but Earth survived. Humanity survived. And the Krell were retreating across 3 entire sectors. Jake asked the question that had been on his mind since waking. Where was Alindra? Maya's expression told him everything. She was alive but in critical condition. The full synchronization with Ember had burned through years of her life. Maybe decades. The medical team was doing everything they could, but Sylvari physiology was different from human. They were learning as they went. Jake pulled himself out of bed despite protests from nurses. His body screamed with every movement, but he did not care. He needed to see her. Alendra's room was under guard, though Jake doubted anyone could hurt her even in her weakened state. Ember lay outside, too large to fit through the doors. The dragon's scales were dulled, his breathing shallow. He looked at Jake with eyes that held exhaustion and something that might have been gratitude. Inside, Lindra lay in a specialized medical bed. Her silver hair, once pure and shining, now showed wide streaks of white. Her face had new lines that had not been there before. She looked older, more fragile, more human somehow. Jake sat beside her bed and waited. On the 3rd day, she opened her eyes. Her first words were a question. Did we win? Jake confirmed it. The Krell were retreating. Earth was safe. Her sacrifice had turned the tide. Alendra smiled weakly. Good, she said. Then my order did not die in vain. I was the last, but perhaps I do not have to be. Jake did not understand at first. Then she explained. The Drakengard could train others. Humans had the right mental discipline and combat instinct. With her knowledge and Ember's guidance, Earth could create its own Drakengard, defenders not just for Earth, but for all threatened worlds. The idea was revolutionary. Jake immediately saw the potential. Humanity could become something new, something the galaxy had never seen. Not just survivors, but protectors. Recovery took months. Alendra's strength returned slowly. Her hair remained white-streaked, a permanent mark of what the synchronization had cost her. Ember also recovered, though his scales never quite regained their original luster. The bond between them was still strong, but they both knew they could not use full synchronization again. Next time would kill them. 6 months after the battle, Jake stood in a training field watching history being made. 20 human volunteers, carefully selected and tested, were attempting their first bonding with Draconites. The eggs had been a surprise. Ember had been carrying them, a final gift from his nearly extinct species. 20 eggs, each containing a juvenile draconite, ready to bond with a compatible partner. It would take years of training before these new pairs could fight, but the foundation was being laid. Jake watched a young pilot named Megan successfully bond with a jade-green draconite. The connection formed in a flash of light, and both human and dragon stumbled as their minds touched for the first time. It was clumsy and uncertain, but it was real. Alendra stood beside Jake, leaning slightly on a walking stick she would need for several more months. Ember rested nearby, watching his offspring with paternal interest. The old dragon rumbled softly, a sound of approval. "You never told me what you truly are," Jake said quietly. "Not a princess, not just a warrior. What are you, Alindra?" She considered the question, watching the new bonds form across the training field. Then she looked at Jake with those violet eyes that had seen so much. "I am the bridge," she said, "between what was and what will be, between your people and mine, between the end of my order and its rebirth, humanity's guardian," Jake suggested. Alindra shook her head. "No, humanity's partner. There is a difference. In orbit above, a new fleet was arriving. Not Krell warships, but Sylvari vessels. The Council had sent a delegation not as observers, but as allies. They had underestimated humanity once. They would not make that mistake again. Other species were taking notice too. Word of Earth's victory had spread across the galaxy. For the first time in centuries, conquered worlds were rising up against the Krell. The empire that had seemed unstoppable was fracturing. All because humans refused to accept the inevitable. Jake received word that he was being promoted to Colonel and given command of the new Dragon Guard program. Maya would be his second in command again. Amy had already volunteered to help train the new riders. Kate was designing better equipment for dragon-mounted combat. The Krell would return eventually. They always did. But when they came back, they would face something they had never encountered before. Dragons and humans fighting side by side. Sylvari wisdom combined with human determination. A new kind of warrior for a new age. Jake looked at the training field, where humans and dragons were learning to trust each other. It was messy and chaotic, but it was beautiful. These bonds would take years to fully form. The first Dragon Guard units would not be combat ready for at least 5 years, but they had time now. Earth had survived. Humanity had proven itself. Alendra touched his arm, drawing his attention. She pointed to the sky where both Earth and the Sylvari fleet were visible. Two species, once strangers, now bound together by necessity and respect. "This is just the beginning," she said. "The Krell control hundreds of systems. Thousands of worlds need liberation. It will take generations." Jake nodded. "Then we better get started." Ember raised his head and roared, a sound of challenge and promise. The juvenile draconites answered with their own smaller roars. Across the training field, 20 new bonds strengthened in response. Admiral Lane watched from a monitoring station, a rare smile on her face. She sent Jake a message with 2 words: "Well done." That night, Jake stood on an observation deck with Alendra. They watched Earth rotate below, blue and green and alive. Millions of people down there owed their lives to the Dragon Rider, who had chosen to stand with humanity when her own people had given up. "Thank you," Jake said simply. Alindra looked at him, surprised. "For what? For believing in us when no one else did? For fighting for a world that was not yours? For showing us what we could become?" She smiled, and in that moment, Jake saw not the ancient warrior or the mysterious alien. He saw a friend. "You saved me first," she reminded him. "On the day we met, you took a bullet meant for me. How could I do anything less than fight for your people?" They stood in comfortable silence, watching Earth below. Somewhere in the galaxy, the Krell were regrouping, planning their revenge. New threats would emerge. The war was far from over, but for the first time in a long time, Jake felt hope. The assignment had been simple: guard the alien princess. Keep her safe during diplomatic talks. A boring job for a soldier who wanted to see action. Instead, Jake had found something far more important. He had found purpose. He had found a partner. He had found the key to humanity's future. The princess was never a princess. She was a warrior, a teacher, a bridge between species. She was hope wearing armor, and together, humans and Sylvari would show the galaxy what real strength looked like, not the strength to conquer. The strength to protect, not the power to destroy. The power to save? The Dragon Guard was born, and nothing would ever be the same.